Today I would like to talk about one director who has made me think, that's important, but I don't know why or how. While watching one of English director Edgar Wright's films, I noticed his montages were different, if not strange, on first impression. In the chapter, The Language of Film, Signs and Syntax, James Monaco has one definition of montage as a process of short shots woven together to communicate a great deal of information in a short time. The arrangement of a montage not only creates a continuity between shots, but also bends the timeline of a film. As a result, audiences understand time is passing through watching the montage code. Typically, when I imagine a montage, something similar to a training montage, a sports competition montage, or narrative montage comes to mind. While of course there are more types of montages, we've all seen it before. The characters going through an important time of growth with a song overlaid to set the mood. What makes Wright's montages and transitions different is that they take after the style of hip-hop montage, similar to the film technique of fast cutting. In an introduction to film studies, author Jill Nelms describes fast cutting as several consecutive shots of a brief duration and is used to build up tension or suspense. Director Darren Aronofsky pioneered this technique in his movies Pi and Requiem for a Dream to represent drug use addiction. But when I was searching for other films with hip-hop montage, I found less movies than I thought. This made me think, why aren't hip-hop montages used more? Looking at Edgar Wright's films, his Three Flavors Cornetto trilogy showcases hip-hop montages and fast cutting. In the second installment, Hot Fuzz, one example is the scene of police officer Nicholas Angel processing teenagers. Let's take a closer look. In an interview, Edgar Wright explains his aim.
Then in Hot Fuzz, the idea was to subvert that by taking the most boring parts of police work, like paperwork, and making it super stylized and sort of approaching it in the way that Michael Bay or Ridley Scott.
Fast cuts and close-ups makes boring paperwork almost as if it appears in an action movie. Therefore, the shot becomes more dynamic and almost comedic, since paperwork isn't typically associated with action. The element of close-ups of the objects adds to the dynamic action feeling of fast cutting. The close-ups are a way to keep up the pace and rhythm of the film, forcing a faster timing similar to an action movie. In one shot of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, we see Scott Pilgrim gearing up for action. The hip-hop montage from the armbands to the shoe tying is more effective for intensifying the moment than if the shot included Scott Pilgrim physically bending down to tie his shoe, which would disrupt the momentum. But interestingly, there is a slow shot, so when the slow shot happens after the preface of the fast cutting, it's an unexpected change and goes back to the awkward character of Scott Pilgrim, making the shot humorous, especially since the shot quickly speeds up after. Through fast cutting, Edgar Wright brings this common technique of montage into a comedic direction. Editor and video essayist Tony Joe from Every Frame of Painting further explains how Wright creates visual comedy through hip-hop montages.
To get your story going. How do you shoot it, and can you get a joke out of it? Well, no. Not if you send out a second unit to do it. Every shot pans from left to right, you include really obvious landmarks and signs, you mix in generic helicopter footage, and you put upbeat music under it so the audience doesn't get bored. This is just lazy filmmaking and boring. We've seen it a million times. What would happen if you were truly inventive with this type of scene?
Not ready.
There we go.
I think Tony Joe raises a good point of how humor doesn't necessarily have to come from dialogue, as demonstrated by Edgar Wright. Half of a film experience is watching the visuals, and if nearly every film utilizes montages, why not take it to its full potential to engage with the audience? If fast cutting can create a comedic effect, how does a montage with slow cuts compare? One could argue that slow cuts create more of a dramatic feel. Without the information overload of fast cutting, the audience can clearly focus on the subject, therefore giving that character importance in the shot. One way I see this is in shots of the dramatic character walk-in. Take one example, Easy A. The character starts at the background of the shot, but slowly makes their way to the foreground. The slower motion gives the character power and a dramatic feel, as if to savor the moment. It would not make sense to use a fast cut, since they are for creating urgency in a shot, or leading up to a climax, not the actual pivotal point. What started out as simply seeing an interesting shot during a film now has transformed into much more. Edgar Wright has elevated fast cutting in hip-hop montage by using these techniques for comedic purposes. Since fast cutting is meant to bring a sense of urgency, one could think it's mainly a technique only for action films, but Edgar Wright brings this sense of urgency to not so urgent activities, such as paperwork or a pub crawl. As a result, his comedic efforts pay off and bring montages to a new light. So next time you find yourself watching an Edgar Wright film, I hope you go,
wow,